Hello, good citizens of the world. This is philosophy in a nutshell. Are you in need of an informative introduction to theories and arguments within philosophy, research-based and to the point? Then look no further. If you enjoy the video, feel free to subscribe, like, share and comment. Today's lesson: Consequentialism and Utilitarianism in a nutshell. Consequentialism is a normative moral theory. Normative theories answer the basic question: what are the standards by which we can morally justify our actions? The three classic normative theories are virtue ethical theory, deontology or rule-based ethics, and consequentialism. Consequentialists come in many forms, but they all answer the question by saying that there is basically only one thing that makes an action morally right: the optimization of good consequences. So, if I choose to spend €100 on my daughter's birthday present, instead of, for instance, giving the money to charity, is this action morally right? Basically, if the action creates the most good possible compared to any other action, it is morally justified according to the consequentialist. Since the consequentialist determines the right action in terms of what causes good to people, she must provide a definition of good. Consequentialists define the good in different ways. The great consequentialists of the utilitarian movement, Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, famously define value in terms of human happiness and what can be utilized to promote happiness. But what is happiness then? According to Bentham and Mill, when all is said and done, happiness is basically pleasure. This is called a hedonistic theory of value and the good. What ultimately makes any person happy is the experience of various kinds of pleasure. The utilitarian does not defend the idea that a person should always aim to promote her own pleasure. The moral task is to promote as much pleasure as possible as such, taking in principle every person's pleasure into account. Sometimes we must sacrifice our own pleasure or that of our close relatives to do the most good that we can for the most people. This relates to the so-called principle of agent neutrality. No one person's interest counts more than anyone else's. According to the consequentialists, we cannot justify special moral obligations to close relatives, to fellow countrymen or any other if such obligations do not promote the best overall consequences. I may, God forbid, have to give my daughter a smaller birthday present, or even no present at all, to prioritize spending the money on charity instead, where they can bring about the most good. One classic protest against utilitarianism criticizes it for having a too simplified idea of what goodness is, taking the good life to consist in having as much pleasure as possible. Utilitarianism has famously been labeled a doctrine worthy of swine. This is, however, a straw man, meaning that the argument presupposes a too simplified presentation of utilitarianism and a simplified view of the pleasures human beings can have. In opposition to Bentham, Mill actually saw not only the amounts of pleasure that an action can produce as a measure for the right action, he also distinguished between different qualities of pleasure. The pleasure you can get from reading Aristotle or playing an intellectually challenging game of chess is of a better quality than, for example, enjoying some ice cream. And we must make sure to take both quality and quantity into account when considering the consequences of an action. Even Bentham had so-called higher pleasures in mind, such as intellectual pleasures, as something to generally make a priority, not because he meant that they have a better quality than so-called simple pleasures, but because, in the long run, intellectual pleasures tend to produce even more happiness. Eating ice cream is a short-term pleasure, and it can even lead to more displeasure if you eat too much of it, whereas reading Aristotle can help you become wiser, which is crucial for your ability to promote happiness throughout the rest of your life. Another worry about consequentialism is that it does not seem to supply us with a very good guidance for our actions. It is very difficult, if not impossible, to predict the consequences of actions. Further, if we constantly try to measure our actions, it undermines important practices and norms. Most consequentialists would probably insist that this poses no problem as long as the theory is understood correctly. Consequentialism is first and foremost a standard for what makes actions right, not a procedure to apply to every action. Ironically, calculating positive and negative consequences is in fact in most cases not a good procedure to really optimizing good consequences. This is exemplified in the so-called happiness paradox. Studies show that one source of unhappiness is in fact the constant striving for happiness. As John Stuart Mill phrases it, ask yourself whether you are happy and you cease to be so. Mill also compares the process of optimizing happiness with finding your way. To travel from A to B, it is not always a good idea constantly to focus on B. Instead, keep your eyes on the road and direct your focus on the relevant signposts. In the same way, to do the most good you can do, don't focus constantly on this abstract goal, but use instead the relevant moral signposts available. Those moral rules, norms and virtues established precisely to help us produce the most happiness possible in the long run. One basic norm that we according to Mill ought to establish is this: you should learn to see the happiness of others as something that makes you happy yourself. Analyzing how best to promote happiness, many utilitarians often emphasize the theory of diminishing marginal utility. The more a person has of something of value, the more the value seems to decrease to that person. Basically, giving 100 euro to a rich person does not promote as much value as when you give the same amount to a poor person. To optimize overall value, we should therefore generally prioritize those in need. Not because inequality is a problem in itself, but because helping those in need leads to the most happiness. The debate does not end here, but this was Consequentialism and Utilitarianism in a nutshell. Feel free to subscribe, like, comment and share if you found the video useful and happiness promoting.